Let's go to 5/4. Load and play. Hi, this is Andre. The JMK Pedals Clockstep is a standalone MIDI clock source designed to synchronize the timing of one or more music devices. It can start and stop everything receiving that sync at the same time, and can also transmit a vast array of MIDI commands which can be quantized to various divisions of the master clock, so you can hack quantized commands out of devices that don't have them built in. The head of JMK Pedals, Joe King, is a very accomplished musician and looper himself, who has done some extraordinarily intricate live looping arrangements using all kinds of devices synced together. So the Clockstep was clearly designed by a performing musician to specifically address different types of music-making issues. Joe reached out to me a while back and offered to send me a blemished unit that he couldn't sell, and I was thrilled to take him up on the offer. Incidentally, I haven't found any obvious cosmetic issues with the unit I received. Joe is active on the Gear Page forum, as am I, and in a discussion about polyrhythmic looping, he mentioned that the Clockstep can actually receive external sync from a device and then work with it in different ways. Joe and I have since bounced some ideas around over the last few months, which have led to the concept explored in this video, which is to use the Clockstep to hack unusual rhythmic effects out of the microcosm. This is definitely an experimental idea, and I'm still learning my way around the Clockstep, as well as the concept of rhythmic looping hacks in general. But I really like the results this gets, and while we've explored different rhythmic hacking techniques in previous videos, using the Clockstep means I can get sounds in a way that I haven't found with any other combination of gear. I have more Clockstep footage recorded aside from what you see in this video. That additional footage is more of a deep dive and goes into greater musical detail, but it doesn't do as good of a job of explaining the basics of exactly what's happening. So this video is intended as a detailed introduction to the concept and the technical arrangements involved. There's more to come with this approach, but I wanted to start with a clear explanation of what's going on. One other quick detail. Throughout this video, we change the time signature of the Clockstep manually through the physical interface. You can also change the time signature instantly via MIDI without having to go into a preset and edit it the way we do in this video. But for the sake of clarity, I decided to go with a non-MIDI hands-on approach to changing the time signature. As always, thank you very much for tuning in. Alright, we have a pre-recorded loop that I did off camera, running in the Looperlative LP1. That is the MIDI clock master. It's sending MIDI clock to the Clockstep. And you can see here on these displays, the red light is a downbeat, and those are quarter notes. Now it's very fast because I deliberately have the Looperlative set to send out really fast notes. I have it set to send out, I think, 16 quarter notes out of one loop. And that's basically to make it a little more flexible for synchronization purposes. Now, the Clockstep is sending MIDI out to the Morningstar, which is hiding on top of the LP1. And we're not sending commands from the Morningstar. We're actually using a secret weapon that it has, which is that it can filter out and modify incoming MIDI commands. So for instance, you could have it receive a MIDI note and it would convert that MIDI note into a continuous controller value and then send that out as a controller. What we're doing here is we're filtering out the MIDI clock. So yes, we're taking the Morningstar and we are deliberately filtering out the MIDI clock that we're receiving from the Clockstep pedal. So the un-MIDI clockified MIDI signal is going into the microcosm from the Morningstar. There is still a MIDI thing being sent, which we'll talk about in just a second. I entered this group of notes into the microcosm also off camera. And you can see right now, this is the tempo pulse on the microcosm. This is the quarter note and downbeat on the Clockstep. So you can see that they are visually lined up, and you can also hear that musically they're lined up. Now, we're going to stop the Clockstep. We're going to go into editing mode for this preset. And we're going to change the time signature. Let's change it to 3/4. Save that. And let's press play. So now you can see that the pulse of the microcosm and the pulse of the clock step are not falling right on quarter notes. So here's what's happening. I have the clock step programmed so that at the beginning of every new measure, it sends out one instance of MIDI continuous controller number 93. Continuous controller 93 is what the microcosm identifies as tap tempo. So if you set a continuous controller message on continuous controller 93, that tells the microcosm that's tap tempo. And if you keep sending that continuous controller at a consistent value, it's going to read that as a tempo. So the reason that I have the MIDI clock stripped out of the signal coming from the clock step is because I only want the microcosm to be seeing the continuous controller. This is sending a continuous controller at the beginning of every measure. But if we change the time signature on the clock step, that changes when it sends that continuous controller message in relation to the main loop. That means that the microcosm, which is only getting its tempo information and timing information from that continuous controller value, that means that the microcosm thinks it's a different tempo. So this is basically a way of tricking the microcosm into doing cross rhythms and polyrhythms. I'm going to change the time signature again, so stop, long press, edit. Let's go to 5/4. Load and play. And now again, you can see that these lights are in a different place because now it's sending it out every 5 quarter notes. So that means that the tap tempo MIDI command is happening at a different interval in relation to the main loop and in relation to the overall clock. And because that's the only thing the microcosm is seeing, that means that we've tricked the microcosm into thinking that the tempo is different. So instead of doing straight quarters and eighths and sixteenths, now it's doing weird cross rhythms on top of everything. Let's go back to 4/4. So it stopped the clock step, edit, going back to 4/4, save, load, play. So now you can see this is lined up with the loop. If we get rid of the microcosm, you can see that's lined right up. Sometimes when you change things around on the microcosm, it gets a little displaced. So sometimes you just have to show it who's boss. What can I say? Right now it's showing me that it's boss. You can also play with this to kind of reset where the downbeat is. Come on. Stop, edit, 3. Load. Play. And what's interesting about this is that instead of being what I would call a straight 3/4 polyrhythm, it realigns with the beat of the LP1 every 3 beats. 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. So I don't know if you'd call that a polyrhythm or a cross rhythm, or both or neither. Sounds good to me.